Hello, I'm Joseph Mougel, and I'm here to give a talk as part of the Wednesday Lunch Artist Talk Series here at the School of Visual and Performing Arts over in the Patti and Rusty Roof Galleries. And today I'm going to be giving a talk about my work that's included in the exhibition that I've co-curated with Min Kim Park named Still Moving. So as it says here, my name is Joseph Mougel, and I thought just to kind of think about this exhibition, this idea of photography and motion media, and also even performance coming in there, is to think about some of the works in which, early on as an undergraduate, and I know there's a lot of undergraduates here, that, first I looked at. And, this is not really anything new, because we can all think about someone like Edward Muybridge, and, I decided to do an ostrich instead of a horse, but it's like very early on we realized that photography not only could collapse time, but also could expand it as well. And so here we have Muybridge, who, as soon as after settling a bet about what the gait of a horse was at gallop, he began to create his own sort of archive of the movements of all animals here. And so here's just one of many examples he had. But this is not the only time I look at it. It was interesting to study photography, and then Joseph Boyce would be shown to me. And again, I was interested again, like in the sense of like, here is this photograph being used to document a performance. This sort of ephemeral act that can only be recorded and seen, and later on through the image of photographs. So here's Joseph Boyce, how to explain pictures to a dead hare. Also, someone like Anime Diata, who they're gorgeous photographs, but still just documents performances. And again, this thing began to echo to me in how the photograph became this capsule. Or again, someone like Chris Burden in his Honest Labor, sort of helping to visualize, sort of intellectual labor and equate that to physical labor as well. But looking at someone also as well as like Nikki S. Lee, who's using the vernacular of the snapshot, and and here it's not really documenting the performance, even though it is. The photograph now becomes an object, which is, as a photographer, I'm always excited when a photograph is an object that we experience, or even someone like Lily McElroy and her sort of I Throw Myself at Men, which sometimes makes me think a little bit of some of Min's work here. But also William Larson, and again, where these are interventions and performances, and they're performances for the camera right here. And so they're moving from being a document to having a very much a sort of specific end result here. Still a performance, even simply as putting a balloon in front of a screen camera, but everything's being composed. And I couldn't help but also think about other artists that I look at. And for you guys who have never seen the Cray Master series, I would suggest that you take a look at it. But someone like Matthew Barney. And you'll see some of these pieces, sort of like being, echoes of my influence, but also to think about like how one could even imagine that, a stage photograph of a performance could have a very similar effect as this video piece here. And also, Patti Reese and her performances, which I endlessly, if I need to, just think about the futility of life and just like those moments when you just have to let go. So this is sort of like, when Min and I were talking about, we're also thinking about the people who influenced us here. So moving forward, a little bit of, my own work. That was me in 1994. I was a Marine. I served 5 years active duty, 5 years in the reserve. And this has, continued to influence my work. Less directly these days, but still there's always an essence of it. I'm also the son of French immigrants. So this is a photograph of my father, Guy, and his mother, Paula. You can also see the date there. And so you can get a sense of, the world in which he faced when he was a very young child there. He grew up in the Alsace-Lorraine region, near the border of Germany. And this is his father, who was a POW for most of the Second World War. And this kind of gives you a sense of like where I may have felt a sense of obligation to join the service. And I felt as if it was something that I had to do. So I was trained as what they refer to as a combat photographer. I still remember to this day, at the position of attention and the drill instructor going like, 0311, 0151, 0311, grunt, 1371, minesweeper, also known as combat engineer, and then all of a sudden he goes, 4671. He just kind of pauses and stares, and he's like, Mougel, Spielberg! And that was combat motion media. So I got trained as a videographer early on. And lo and behold, I also learned photography when I got there because they didn't have a video camera, and I didn't want to be what they refer to as an AV librarian checking out slide projectors. I wanted to be active, and very early on I started as a documentary photographer, eventually got a video camera in my hand. I traveled around the world, many times to the Mediterranean, mostly Northern Africa. It was during, in between the Gulf Wars, is when I served on active duty. And I enjoyed being able to see other people's lives. And again, like I say, the idea of documenting, that's really what I did. I also made training videos and worked with what they refer to as mishaps. But once I got to the end of my 5-year stay, I really decided I wanted to see what it would be like to be a civilian. So I went to art school. Actually didn't go directly to art school. I actually decided to have a photography business, study it, and then to also go to the study business. And then found myself in art history class, and it just sort of kind of went downhill from there. But I also found myself, I was used to wearing a uniform, and I didn't know what my uniform would be. And I had a lot of fun looking at this image today because I didn't want to look like a Marine because I was in the reserves at this time. And so I just basically put this little scarf around. It kind of looks like my beard. And I had some gloves right here stuck into my hat, kind of looks like my hair. And it's kind of funny that I eventually grew into what I was trying to create a uniform for. But the uniform became really important. And again, thinking about like photographing, my earlier work was really just looking at myself. This is a time where I was part of the Ready Reserves. Ready Reserves are those who go 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. And I was also, starting to have a civilian life that I really enjoyed as well, and I kind of found myself in both worlds. But I started looking at individuals who were for the first time faced with a very real idea that they were going to be deployed, not deployed once for 6 months, but multiple times. And this was at the very start of the Second Gulf War. And I just, there was this kind of feeling within the air. And so I went back to my documentary roots and started to document individuals. But then there was also this idea, or the beginning of this idea of time, or expanding time a little bit within photograph. And so I had these two images showing them at home what they were going to be leaving behind, and also the uniform in which they were going to be wearing more than 1 weekend a month, but also fully. And I was very much conflicted, and I didn't know what quite to do. But I did throw some applications towards grad school, got into grad school, and the choice became very clear, but it didn't change my being conflicted. And so, going back, thinking about Joseph Mougel's work, all of a sudden those performers start to influence me. Here I am explaining myself to a live hair. But really, again, I said I was the son of French immigrants, and I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and being French, my father, needed he enjoyed rabbit and not as a pet. And so my first experience of life ending in death was at 3 years old. And this is something which I found myself, I don't speak too much about my military experience, but I felt as if the hair was where I should begin my conversation. And so these became performances of narratives. And I refer to them as performances in support of cameras. I didn't sketch these out, I wrote a narrative, and then I acted it out. And thinking about the history of the Marines being island hoppers from the Second World War, again, where I pull a lot of my influences. Very fortunate, a dying hurricane came through Georgia and flooded the lake. Took advantage of this. I never played cowboys and Indians, but I also was looking at a lot of art history. And for you guys who are familiar with art history, this is my Saint Sebastian right here. And also my father, being a beekeeper, in his now hobby and retirement, him remembering his life in France and the bees, which connected him to his father, which connects me to my father. But also my father would always talk about his time to grow up the bees. And I thought about this thing of taking care of something, but also in exchange for what they produce. So I was starting to think about, sort of complex relationships. I was choosing to be the first to come back, and so here I am in my own parade, and then this young individual who's staring back, questioning that choice. And I have a tendency to be very hard on myself, but I also have a tendency to sort of really think about, like what are the consequences of my action. I was choosing to lead those individuals who I had the utmost respect for, because I found myself in a path in which, has led me to stand in front of you today. But also, I really began to create this figure who also had a sense of being tragic or being a sense of insignificance, which comes and plays out later on. Again, photographer, and so as I began to sort of distance myself from that memory, I started thinking about that experience, that transition from civilian to Marine, and how that happened. It was a 13-and-a-half-week period where I was no longer civilian Joseph Mougel and became Private Mougel. I tried to recapture that myself, but I realized as soon as I put the uniform on, I had that weight, I had that experience there, and I failed. So I started to create my own sort of recreation of that experience with individuals between the ages of 18 and 25 who had never served in the service, and I painted them white, and I had them wear the uniform. Performance. It's always important to me here. They were performing for me. I set the stage, I gave them the parameters, and they performed the act of his naivete. So it was really important that I actually transformed each one of them. Again, the photograph I find what is really interesting is I wasn't interested in documenting every aspect. This is not the work, this is a document for you guys. This is the work here. And the photograph made invisible my performance of transformation. And this is where I started thinking about the photograph as a document of that performance there. And I did about 50 of these different images over time. It's kind of funny, one of them contacted me not too long ago, and I'm going to meet up with him and give him a new print because he was sad that he had lost his. Talked about land arts in the American West. I started thinking about my experience again within the military, creating training videos, and also thinking about how that memory was becoming distant to me, and how I would sort of think about what was going on at the world at the time. At this point, what was supposed to only last 6 months, it lasts up to 2 years and continue for many years afterward. And so I started creating my own training video. This is something that we would train called I'm up, they see me, I'm down. And you would run up a hill, say that in your head. And so I'm up, they see me, I'm down. There's a time in which it would take for someone to aim in on you. And so hopefully that would keep you from staying up too long while you're running and taking a hill. And so this is, the beginnings of me starting to dive into that sort of more video performance. Let's see here, where's it goes. There we go. When in doubt, we start. So this is about 2.5 hours of video going on here, compressed into about 2 minutes, 15 seconds. I won't have you guys watch the whole thing. I like to treat a lot of my video pieces as still images with time moving through there. And I always think about my use of time as a way of expanding the photograph. And so I could have easily created a photograph with multiples in me, but it wouldn't have had the same feeling of escalation and building up during that time. And I do always enjoy if people laugh because humor is always important for me within my own work. Any of you guys have ever been to New Mexico, there's these things called prickly pears, and I'm running up this hill barefoot. This also became my identity of changing my uniform. I couldn't wear the uniform proper because I'd already distanced myself from the military. I'd forgotten how to wear that uniform. And that was something that was also really important to me within this work. A bit of a dive down there. Oh, room for one more. I speak a lot about the military. One of my first experiences when I got to my first duty station in the Marine Corps was to move a hole. Yeah, just think about that for a little bit, moving a hole. A hole has to be moved perfectly. You have to sit there and take dirt from an existing location, move it to another location, and make sure you keep it in the order in which you removed it from the previous hole, i.e. bottoms on bottom, tops on top. This was considered a joke where I had to move the hole from the Sergeant Major's lawn to the commanding officer of the base. Let's just say private doesn't work too well with the spouse of the commanding officer of the base. But this idea of this feudal act became really important to me, and it's this sort of existential this exercise of thinking about how one would sort of think about negating their own existence, or negating a part of their lives. So this is the playa at near Wendover, Nevada. If you guys don't know Wendover, Nevada is the home of the Enola Gay. The Enola Gay was the first bomber to carry the atomic bomb. I didn't want to photograph the Enola Gay. I just wanted to think about our history and my relationship to the history. I also just wanted to dig a perfectly round hole. The spin starts killing me after a while. It was, this human-sized hole, this foxhole, and I was really thinking again about the Second World War. I mean, just really trying to imagine trench warfare and how that would have been, I never had that experience right there, but just imagining what it took to go through that and how that would change. And I really, because I always think about the Second World War. My mother was from Martinique, my father was from Strasbourg. You can just imagine if the outcome of the Second World War was different, I wouldn't be here. They lived in different locations. And I always think about that act and that idea of negating one's own existence. That's the reason why I felt compelled to serve. Digging holes is something I sort of began to translate into a different act. I started to use this as my way of creating a visualization of my studio practice, engaging with the land, and thinking about land interventions, and this ideal of engaging the land on a human scale. And I started thinking about other ideals of politics, and I started thinking about our relationship to the land, our relationship to environments and changes to land and environments there. And what I began to do was to dig these perfectly circular holes that are human sized from sunrise to sunset. And so this is one of my first ones that I did in the Mallee of South Australia. And I would document myself sort of descending into the earth. Basically every 15 minutes, begin digging this perfectly round hole. This sort of absurd act, but also this act that sort of had me engage with the ideal of landscape. This ideal that one can only know the land through that experience, through that effort of seeing land. It's one thing to come by, see the photograph, and take that most picturesque moment. It's another thing to actually have a physical engagement with that land, to see it at its best and at its worst. And also to think about what's above and beneath the land. So this is sort of another one of these done in a pasture, and you can kind of get a sense of the time of day as it changes. Literally keeping the sun to my face. I use that as a guide as I move around, removing a particular amount of soil that it would take to actually go into the earth, not knowing what I would find. And then also even, I love this fact, I had to cross property lines to finish it. And I've done multiples of these. The uniform persists. You didn't notice it's changed into a jumpsuit. I always need to have a uniform. And I actually created uniforms for other people to kind of participate in these performances. This is another one that I did at Marquette University in Milwaukee. This is sort of what it looks like at the end of the day right here. This was a 14-hour day, so from sunrise to sunset, every 15 minutes removing soil. So I'm there before the sun rises, and I'm leaving after the sun is set. And it really is interesting to kind of really spend that time and get to know a place. You see everything, the comings and goings, and these start to influence the videos that I produce. So this is a document. This is another sort of document, kind of taking a look at some field notes that I had. There's that topsoil about 3 weeks afterwards. And if you look back at this previous image there, you can see these are the artifacts I pulled out. I had to give this over to the local archaeologist. He was in Purdue, like on a bunch of old Pringle wrappers. Because it wasn't always Marquette University. There was other things prior to that. He was interested in, like any of you guys who study archaeology, you're basically digging through other people's trash piles. So he was really excited that I had done this. And the students would ask me questions, and I would start thinking about this idea of trying to, again, like I say, this sort of individual human experience of the land. Also, I found foundation. And I like this idea of like this very scientific approach to trying to understand the land in this sort of pseudoscience experiment, but also having to deal and to adjust Adapt and overcome is something that I learned from the Marine Corps, and I love it when it happens in this work. And so here I am with my own adapt and overcome, and I found myself with a makeshift table. The performances, at this time I was thinking the fact that we had our last World War II veteran to leave the Congress, and I again found myself thinking about the foxhole, but also to think about how the foxhole provided one with a moment of civility. And here I am thinking about my own little petit déjeuner in the foxhole. So, sardines, olives, dried fruit, some cheese. Oh, by the way, if you ever, the French in their MREs, meal ready to eat, they have little bottles of wine in there. My father told me stories of my grandfather during the Second World War, and the stories my grandfather shared with my father were mainly those of the moments where he could remember that he was French. The sounds that you hear, I recorded sounds the day before, or the day after, of all the things I would hear around the space. Marquette University, Catholic University, the bells are a big part of it. The seagulls are deafening, but also would capture the sound of the roads going by, people walking, talking. They would fit into my 12-minute sort of performance video. Here I am, doing another one. This is exposure. I've changed the viewpoint. These are all in the back, so you can see them in their entirety. But here I am thinking about how to negate spaces, and I think about how our relationship with Cuba has changed. I've seen both sides of Guantanamo. I've been on the inside and the outside of it. And I was thinking about this idea of a space that is being removed or negated from its surrounding environment. So here I am building my own exclosure. Exclosures are also things that are used in pastures and field studies to be able to see what happens to the environment in its natural state and then what would happen when you exclose it from there. And I really just love the sky, and it's probably my favorite part. And then I'd say everyone has its own performances. This is another one, Male. There was a lot of flooding in Australia this time. I decided to dig in a dry lake bed, but there was still a fair bit of a high water table, unbeknownst to me when I started digging the hole. I also hit a solid sheet of salt, so I couldn't dig the hole all the way down. This is another one, Dog Mouth. You kind of see that the titles are kind of inspired by the way in which military operations would be named, so Dog Mouth, Sagebrush. But also they're inspired by the Dog Mouth is also what you refer to as prairie dogs. They're also referred to as Dog Mouths. Also, I was referred to as Mougel Mouse because the drill instructor couldn't help but saying M-O-U-G-E-L. There's a lot of physical, sort of, a little bit of pain that comes with these right here. They are human scale. I mean, I try to dig them to where basically they're about this deep. Everyone always asks me, like, how deep are they? Coming sort of near the end here, sort of some of the work that I'm working on now. Again, performance is really important to me. I think about time and the relationship of time to humans on this planet based on the idea of human intervention. And so these are acts mowing a field, and it took me 9 hours, 17 minutes, and 43 seconds to mow with a hand mower an entire pasture. But also to think about how that pasture will also return to being a pasture afterwards, an overgrown pasture. I moved to Wisconsin, and I thought, what better than to shovel frozen lake? It's an odd experience to shovel frozen lake. I did not do it for 47 hours and 23 minutes and 51 seconds all at once. This was done over a couple of weeks. But I did time myself every time I went out there. But again, that performance was part of it. And I also love the fact of how the camera makes the performance invisible, and how that document, just like those early documents of Chris Burton, of Joseph Boyce, and how it compressed it where it was just this one iconic image right here. But the performance itself is lost, it's invisible at the time. And here I leave just the idea of like how much time was spent during it. Some sort of details here, that's what a snow-covered lake looks like. I got to talk to a lot of ice fishermen out there, and apparently this was an activity at one point in time where people would shovel lakes for ice skating rinks, so it wasn't that strange, except for the fact that I have a giant camera out there with it. I shot these with a large format camera to sort of make, sort of reference this ideal of landscape and document, but also the sense that I wanted to function both as a window into the world and also as a document. So the scale of these is about 32 by 40. This is a lake after it's been shoveled, and as best I could. You know, and I would bring the camera out there every day and set it back into the same location to photograph and make sure I was, getting the right view. And by the way, just one beautiful thing about a camera is I didn't shovel in a square, I shoveled in a V for the camera. Yeah, that's the other thing that's beautiful about photography, only what's within the frame. And just to give you a sense of, what I look like on the ice out there, this is a quick little sped up time lapse. But literally, this is what I did for many days. And there's something to be said about being the person that's like, stay away from the crazy person. But here I am, again, after I've shoveled it, it's, I have to sweep the lake off. I think I'm going to go into curling. But really, again, like I say, almost all my photographs, I found myself moving away from being a documentary photographer to being one who thinks about the performative act of creating a photograph right here, and how the camera how I can either expand that image through video, or how I can even use a still image to collapse my performances down to a select few compositions. So with that, I think I'm close on time. Thank you.